Right, so in this video I try and show you how the timing works on Virago engines, and everything I'm going to tell you refers to XV700s, 750s, 920s, XV1000s and 1100s. A couple of things first, just to get them out of the way. English is not my first language, so if I don't pronounce something properly, don't beat me up for it. But yeah, I try to make sense. The other thing is, this is a working engine. I'm going to show it afterwards. Yeah, a few things that I'm going to talk about might seem fairly self-evident. But we've met people in the past who sometimes mix up front and rear, clockwise and counterclockwise, and these kind of things. And I just want to make this video as foolproof as possible. One more thing, I'm making this video using a mobile phone, because that's the only camera I have at hand with a display. So I have a feedback, what you see. So yeah, sometimes it will be a little bit shaky, but I'll do my best to show you the critical points regardless. Okay, so let's get to it. At the moment, the engine is sitting in a random position, somewhere between top dead center and bottom dead center and whatnot. As you can see, I'm not sure how well, I use some flashlight. As you can see, the little pointy bit, the timing mark there, is pointing down, so it's somewhere. You also see there's a little dot right next to it. That comes into play when we try to dial in its position, because that shows us where it, well, it's a punch mark. That has to be, so is the point, aligned with that point a bit at 12 o'clock, if we look at it this way. So yeah, first of all, we have to find the engine's zero positions. Now, before we get into that, I have to tell you about the Virago engine. Now, this bugger spins clockwise. You have a little arrow on the timing plate, or the timing cover, under the timing cover. It's cast into the engine casing, basically, or the engine cover. In order to get to it, you have to remove that timing cover. Your might look different if it's a different year, but yeah, you have to pop that thing off, and then you have to pop this thing off, which exposes the hole in the center where the little socket sits. There's a piece of paper on it, and I'm going to tell you about that in a moment. So yeah, in order to do the timing, we have to pop that off, and we have to pop the cam cover off, and we have to pop the cam cover off the other side as well. That. As you can see, this one is sitting at a random position around 3 o'clock, but it's pretty much the same as the rear cylinder. When we are looking at the alignment marks, we're looking at the one on the top, that, at 12 o'clock. The little thingy, that prong up there. So yeah, this is a 75-degree engine, which means the cylinders are 75 degrees apart from one another, and number one cylinder is the rear one. Whatever it does, 285 degrees later, the front cylinder does the same thing. I put the flashlight down so I can make some room for myself. So yeah, basically that's the direction the crank is spinning, and this means this does something. Then after 360 minus 75 degrees later, basically this one will do the same thing. Right, first of all, we have to find the starting point, shall we say, as per the manual, which is T mark through that window, and that thing pointing up. I try to use the flashlight on the phone, maybe that helps. So that pointing up and the T mark behind that window. I made it a bit easier because I was sure that it will be shit on the video, so I have a piece of paper on this socket. Oh, one more thing. To make your life easier, pop the plugs out and just put them on a piece of cloth to keep them clean, because now you don't have to battle the engine's compression. So we start turning the engine clockwise and we try to find the T mark. We have to be gentle. I see an F, and after the F the T mark will appear. That is for ignition timing, but we don't care about that at the moment. I try to be gentle, so I'm going to need both hands for a second. There we go. Can you see the T? Now, that's the paper I use to make it more visible in case you wouldn't be able to see it through this hole, but the main thing is we're on the T and it's aligned here and there, so that is basically just an extension for the window. It's the same thing. So at the moment we're on top dead center on the rear cylinder. As you can see, the little pointy prongy bit is aligned with that at 12 o'clock. All good and gravy. Now the engine turns counterclockwise, as I said. Sorry, clockwise. Fucking hell. So we carry on and we keep an eye on the marks on the flywheel. Soon, you can see it on the paper already, we're approaching I. Bent a bit over it. I'll try to push it back. Yeah, the socket has quite a bit of play, so you have to use the window after all. Sorry about this, but practically I'm doing this one-handed. There we are. And now the eye is lined up, which is the top dead center for the front cylinder. And that happened 285 degrees later. So technically now the front cylinder's cam sprocket should be pointing up. Let's check. I try to make this video uncut. It will be a bit longer, but just to prove I'm not a lying bastard. Right, as you can see, that little dot on the top is aligned, which means this cylinder is doing the exact same thing the rear did 285 degrees ago. Alright, let's crank it a bit further and let's find the T again, going in the same direction. It's not really necessary because by now we confirmed that everything's spot on, but I have something to point out. The other thing I want to show you is check the position there. This turns counterclockwise because you have an intermediate cam between the crank and the sprocket. Basically, if this turns this way, that thing down here is going to turn this way, and with the chain it is going to pull everything counterclockwise, so it changes the direction. And this turned there, and that angle is 142.5 degrees, exactly the half of what we did here, 285, because there's a 2-to-1 ratio, as this is a 4-stroke engine. Again, I'm not trying to teach you how to suck eggs. It's just something I have to point out to avoid misunderstandings. Okay, so let's carry on. Let's find the T again, which is pretty close, since you are 75 degrees apart. Now it's only 75 degrees between the two symbols, the T and the I. Sorry, I have to move my hand again. Come on, just a teeny bit. Yeah, here we go. We're on T again, as you can see. Oh boy, that's pointing down. That should be pointing up. Well, no. Remember, this turns twice by the time this turns once. So we went a full rotation, 360 degrees here, but this only turned 180. That's why it's facing down. If we carry on doing that, clockwise still, to find I again, which is the top dead center for the front cylinder. Yep, went over it. Let's go back, just gently, yep. We're there. Come on, focus. Right, so we're on I. Now the other cylinder, the front, will be 180 degrees out. It did the exact same thing the rear does, basically, just a little bit later, 285 degrees later. That's how you can be sure your engine is timed properly. And yeah, that's pretty much it. To fix things, if something's not in time, that's not too complicated, because you basically remove this bolt that holds the cam sprocket in place. Then you can remove the sprocket and move the sprocket with the camshaft to correct the timing if you're a few angles off. If it's just a tiny bit, like in my case, mind you, this is an 86 bike, so it's not perfectly aligned with these, as the chains are a little bit stretched by now. But the thing stands, if it's nearby in the 2, 3, 5 degree neighborhood of the alignment, that's fine. If it's way off, then yeah, of course you have to do something about it. But if you check the timing this way, and you need to move the sprocket, then you take this bolt off. In the case of the front cylinder, you have a baffle plate if your bike is was made after 86. If your bike was made between 81 to 83, so the first generation Virago, then the baffle plate is on the rear cylinder, because the crankcase breather hose that connects to the rear of the engine. So I should finish this train of thought. So in order to do anything about the position of the sprocket, you take the bolt off, you pull the sprocket off, and you can align things. One thing that you have to be careful with, first of all, you have to take the chain tensioner out. So you have to unbolt it to Allen bolts. This thing pops out, puts some slack on the chain so you can work with it. And yeah, once the sprocket is off, you have to make sure you keep tension on the chain. You don't want the chain to do anything funky down there or move about on the bottom end. So keep some tension on the chain while you're playing with the sprocket or the cam position. The best thing you can do is use one of those cargo hooks with the rubber band kind of thing, and hook the chain up to that and connect the other end of that rubber band to something else, so it keeps the chain under tension just a little bit, so it doesn't move about. And yeah, that's how you do that. If you need to replace camshafts, because let's say the previous owner sold you this bike as a non-runner and they were tinkering about with the heads and they might have mixed up the camshafts, and you can't be sure whether you have a rear in the front or the front in the rear, or you know, they are positioned properly or they are not swapped or whatnot, you have to pull the shaft. This means you have to get the sprocket off. Again, apply tension on the chain so it doesn't move about. And once the sprocket is out of the way, you have to take this retaining bolt out, which has that little plate that holds the camshaft bearing or bushing in place. And then you need a flat piece of iron or wood across there. And you use this bolt or something with the same thread but a little bit longer. And you have to poke a hole through the center of that tool and use this bolt as a puller. As you tighten that down, going of course across that flat piece of steel or wood, that is going to pull the shaft out. If you have to add washers to do that, yeah, you might have to add some washers to increase the pull of the length of the pull, or if your extracting bolt, shall we say, removal bolt is a bit too long, yeah, you might need washers, but the idea is that you can use a flat piece of something with a hole in the center, so this fits through, or something like that fits through, and you can carry on cranking on that, and that is going to eventually pull it out. The other thing you can use is a slide hammer, which, well, not everyone has that, but making up something like that, just extemporizing, shall we say, a piece of wood with a hole in the center or a flat piece of steel, it might be a bit easier. But the main thing is you have to make a puller tool along those lines. So yeah, as you can see, that's the timing. The engine definitely rotates this way, and whatever this does, that's gonna do the same thing 285 degrees later. Thank you for watching, and again, sorry about the mistakes I've made, or other things, but yeah, hopefully this clarifies a few things. Now we are all buttoned up, basically. All the covers are back on both sides, and I promised to show you that this is a running bike and I'm not a lying bastard. Oh yeah, fuel tap. Right, so come on, you're not that cold. See? See? It's alive. And it runs on both cylinders. So yeah, the timing is right.